Okay, today our subject is about fiscal policy and the federal budget. Of course, fiscal policy is one policy in any economy. The other policy is called monetary policy. So today our focus is upon fiscal policy. What actually we mean when we say fiscal policy? As I said, in any economy there are two policies. In any economy, there are two policies. First, we have fiscal policy. Fiscal policy consists of changes in government expenditure or government spending and or taxes. So, it consists of changes in government spending and or taxes. Why the government do that? In order to attain certain macroeconomic variables such as stability of the price level, lower unemployment rate, or high economic growth. So a fiscal policy consists of changes in government spending and or taxes in order to attain certain macroeconomic goals, such as stability of the price level, low unemployment rate, and high economic growth. Of course, since we now are presenting the definition of fiscal policy, as I said, we have two policies in any economy. So let's mention briefly about the monetary policy and then move back to talk about fiscal policy. Monetary policy, of course, here I should say that the fiscal policy is in the hands of the government. That is, the government is the one that initiates or uses the fiscal policy. How about the monetary policy? The monetary policy, of course, consists of changes in the money supply and the interest rate in order to achieve certain macroeconomic goals, such as, stability of the price level, low unemployment rate, or economic growth. Of course, monetary policy is in the hands of the central bank. So let me state the definition of the monetary policy. Monetary policy consists of changes in the money supply and interest rate in order to achieve certain macro goals, such as low unemployment, rate, stability of the price level, and high economic growth. Of course, the monetary policy is laid out by the central bank, or is in the hands of the central bank. It is in the hands of the central bank. Now, let us now go back to talk about, of course, the fiscal policy and other related important concepts related to the fiscal policy. As I said, of course, fiscal policy, of course, affects, as well as the monetary policy, affects the demand side of the economy. So fiscal policy affects the demand side of the economy. That is, it affects aggregate demand. Why it does affect the aggregate demand? Because fiscal policy consists of government spending and taxes, and both factors or both components, government spending and taxes, are factors of the total spending or aggregate demand. Therefore, fiscal policy affect, aggregate demand, the demand side of the economy. Now, before I, give more details about the fiscal policy, let us, go and talk about the federal budget. Of course, the federal budget consists of two not necessarily equal parts. It consists of two not necessarily equal parts. There are government spending and tax revenue. So there are government spending or government expenditure and tax revenue. So federal budget or government budget, therefore, government budget is equal government expenditure, spending, plus tax revenue. Government budget is equal G plus T, where G stands for government spending and T stands for tax revenue. So let us, see how is the government budget consists of Remember that a government budget can be in one of three states. Government budget can be in one of three states. The government budget can be in a surplus state, it could be in a deficit state, or the government budget can be balanced. So let's talk about this. Okay, first, government, of course, we have a surplus or budget surplus, which is, of course, it means that government, government spending is, of course, less than less than tax revenue. So whenever the amount of the government spending is less than the amount of tax revenues, then we say that the budget of the government is experiencing a surplus. A surplus which implies that the government tax revenue, of course, is greater than the amount of government spending. Now, what about, budget deficit? Budget deficit, this means that the government spending is much greater than the government tax revenue. So a budget deficit means that the amount of government spending is greater than the amount of tax revenue. So which implies G greater than T. So whenever the amount of government spending is greater than the tax revenue, then we say that we have the state of the budget is in a deficit. Okay. The third state of the budget, federal budget or government budget, is when it is balanced. Balanced budget. This will take place, balanced budget will take place when the amount of G is equal to the amount of T. That is, the government spending is equal to the tax revenue. G equal T. Okay? So whenever G equal T, then we have a government, a balanced budget. Now, here we have to, as you can see, if we take the United States as an example, you notice that in 2020, the US has recorded a ratio of government spending to GDP equal about 43.8%. In 2000, the government ratio of G to GDP, gross domestic product, was over 43%. So in 2020, ratio of government spending to GDP was over 43%. Now, in the same year, in 2020, ratio of, still we're talking about here in the United States, in the US, ratio of tax revenue to GDP was over 25%. From this number, you can see that the United States in 2020 has experienced deficit. So in 2020, the US has experienced a deficit in the budget has experienced a deficit in the budget. Now, as you can see here, we have to differentiate between, of course, federal budget and public debt. So we have to differentiate between these two terms. When we say federal budget, we mean, of course, we talk about government spending from one hand and tax revenue from the other hand. However, when we talk about federal budget, we talk about public debt or national debt or public debt, of course, that means the amount of money that the government owes its creditors. The amount of money that the government owes its creditors. Let me write this, definition. So public debt or federal debt or national debt is the amount of money that the government owes its creditors. Okay? So this is the amount of money that the government owes its creditors. Okay? Now, it looks that the United States public debt as of this year, 2023, amount to over $31 trillion. So, public debt in US in 2023 is over $31 trillion. $31 trillion. This, if we divide this amount of debt on the US population, it means that each individual, or the share of each American citizen, is over $8,000. So the share of the public debt on each American, his share of the public debt is over $8,000. Now, so this is the difference. Of course, this is highlighting the difference between federal budget and the public debt or national debt. Okay. Now let's move to talk about other also concepts, because we are talking about taxes. Okay, let us talk about the income tax. Okay, of course, in any country there are three types. Usually there are three kinds of tax structures. There are three kinds of tax structure. Any economy can either experience or one of these tax structures. Okay, we have, of course, progressive tax structure. Progressive tax structure, it means the tax rate increases as a person's taxable income rises. So a person, when we say progressive tax structure, it means the tax rate will increase when the person's taxable income level increases. So here means that the tax rate will increase when a person's taxable income increases. For instance, a person will pay, for instance, 10% when his income is $20,000, and he pays 20% when his income rises to $40,000, and so on and so forth. So this is the meaning of progressive tax structure. For instance, currently the United States is using this type of tax structure, okay? And there are 6 marginal income tax in the United States, ranging from a low of 10% to a high of 35%, okay? Now, the second type of tax structure is, of course, proportional tax structure. In this type of tax, of course, the same, tax rate is used for all levels of income. The same tax rate is used for all levels of income. Same tax rate is used for all levels of income. For instance, a person will pay, for instance, 10% when his income is, $20,000. Also, he will pay 10% when his income is $100,000. Okay? Now, the third kind of tax structure is regressive. Regressive is regressive tax structure. Of course, in this kind of tax, in this kind of tax structure, of course, the tax rate will decrease as the taxable income level increases. So here, the tax rate decreases as the taxable income level increases. As the taxable income level, increases. For instance, suppose you pay 10% when your income is, $30,000, and of course you pay less than that when your income increases. Now, let us now go back to fiscal policy. Now, as we said, fiscal policy consists of changes in government spending and or taxes in order to achieve or attain certain macroeconomic goals, such as a low level of unemployment, high economic growth, and stability of prices. There are 2 kinds of fiscal policy. There are 2 kinds of fiscal policy. We have expansionary fiscal policy Okay? And the other one is contractionary fiscal policy. Of course, expansionary fiscal policy is used to, of course, close up the gap, the output gap. Usually we use expansionary fiscal policy, okay? Usually Keynesian use expansionary fiscal policy, of course, in order to, whenever we have a recessionary gap, that is, whenever the level of, or the short-run level of output is less than the full employment output or natural GDP, okay? Now, expansionary fiscal policy, of course, is used to close up any output gap. Usually, Keynesian believe that the economy is not self-regulating and that it takes too long for the economy to regulate itself or to go back to long-run equilibrium. Therefore, it is hard to wait, for a long time in order for the economy to go back to long-run equilibrium. Therefore, Keynesian believe that they should, or the government should have an important role in the economy through its fiscal policy or monetary policy. So fiscal policy, of course, affects the demand side of the economy, affects the demand side of the economy. So expansionary fiscal policy consists of increases in government spending and or decreases in taxes. So expansionary fiscal policy, either the government increases its spending, which means expansionary fiscal policy, or it uses expansionary fiscal policy by or through decreasing the income tax or taxes. So here we can see that this is what is meant by expansionary fiscal policy. Now let's talk about the second type of fiscal policy. It's called contractionary fiscal policy. Contractionary fiscal policy. Of course, contractionary fiscal policy affects the demand side of the economy, that is aggregate demand. Now, of course, this policy is used when the economy is experiencing an inflationary gap, that is, when the level of output in the short run is much greater than the full employment output or the natural GDP. Of course, in this case, or in this state, or this situation, then the government can, of course, interfere or intervene in the economy to move the economy back to long-run equilibrium. So the meaning of contractionary fiscal policy consists of decreases in government spending and or increases in tax rate. So let us discuss how to implement these policies, okay? As I said at the beginning, we use expansionary fiscal policy, when, of course, let me say something here. Expansionary fiscal policy, it is used when we have a recessionary gap. Recessionary gap that implies the level of output in the short run is less than the natural GDP, which implies that output in short run is less than full employment or natural real GDP. Natural real GDP. Now, as far as the contractionary fiscal policy, it is used, of course, when we have an inflationary gap. Which implies that the economy in the short run is doing better than the full employment output. When it does, better than the full employment output, it means that we are experiencing a kind of inflation in the economy. So the job of the government is to intervene in order to move the economy back to long-run equilibrium. Now, let us have some examples to see how the government uses these policies, to, of course, move the economy or to close up the output gap. Now, when we say output gap is equal, of course, the difference between output Q minus QN, where Q level of output in short run, and QN, of course, natural real GDP. So the difference between them is called output gap. And whenever there is a difference between them, the government, of course, intervenes. The government will intervene in order to close up that gap. So let's give an example of how the government, of course, here's the output gap. Now, let's say, for instance, say that we are in an economy that experiences, of course, a recessionary gap. Okay, an example that shows how an expansionary fiscal policy is used. Okay, now, because Keynesians believe that the economy is not self-regulating, then they believe that in order to close up the gap, then they have to, of course, use either the expansionary fiscal policy or contractionary fiscal policy. That is, the government should intervene in the economy in order to move the economy back to long-run equilibrium. So now we give an example of how expansionary fiscal policy is used. Okay, say that the economy is in a recessionary gap. Okay, so graphically, this is how we draw this economy. This is real GDP. This is price level. And this is, of course, aggregate demand. This is short run aggregate supply. Of course, this is the long run aggregate supply. So as you can see, the economy is now here. Q1. The economy is now at the Q1, short-run equilibrium at the Q1. And so here we have a recessionary gap. We have a recessionary gap. So now, of course, according to the Keynesian economists, we cannot wait for the economy to heal itself by itself because it takes too long. Therefore, they believe that the economy, in order to close up this gap, okay, they have to use an expansionary fiscal policy, which is either increase in G or a decrease in tax. So if they use, of course, if, for instance, they increase their G. So here, government, of course, now they have to use expansionary fiscal policy through the increase in government spending. So G will increase. That implies total expenditure will increase. Total expenditure will increase, which implies aggregate demand will increase, which implies that it shifts to the right. So why we do this? In order to close up the gap. So it shifts to the right. It will continue to shift until it reaches here. So we move, as you can see, aggregate demand shift to the right through the use of expansionary fiscal policy. So now we move from 1, where the price level is here, P1, and we move to point 2 here, where the price level has become P2. So as a result of the increase as a result of using the expansionary fiscal policy, what you see that in the long run, of course, the level of output has increased to Qn, and the price level has increased to P2. So as a result of increasing G, the level of output increase to Qn. Qn is the, of course, naturally GDP, and the price level increased to increase from P1 to P2. So now, through the use of expansionary fiscal policy, the economy, has adjusted itself, moved from a disequilibrium state to an equilibrium state, and the level of output has, gone back to full employment output. Now, of course, this is the use of expansionary fiscal policy through the use of government spending. How about taxes? Say the government wants to use taxes instead of government spending. Let's see how taxes are used. Let me erase over here. Now, using expansionary fiscal policy, through decreasing income tax. So now the government will use expansionary fiscal policy, when it decreases income tax. No, when income tax decreases, that implies disposable income which is the difference between the level of income and taxes, will increase. And when the disposable income increases, that implies consumption will increase, because consumption is a function of disposable income. So this implies consumption increases because consumption is a function of YD, disposable income. So when consumption C increases, then aggregate demand will increase. Which implies it shifts to the right. Shift to the, as you see graphically. It's clear now? So let us illustrate that graphically. Let us illustrate what I said over here about the decrease in taxes, of course, graphically. So graphically, this is what we have. Real GDP price level, we have aggregate demand, we have short-run aggregate supply, short-run aggregate supply. Okay? And we have, of course, the long-run aggregate supply. Long-run aggregate supply. Long-run aggregate supply. Okay? Here, of course, we have to put here where the long run supply, this vertical line intersects the horizontal axis of this XY plane, we put Qn, where Qn, of course, is potential output. Or the same thing as natural real GDP. So now we are at point 1 over here. We have short-term equilibrium Q1. Now, of course, the government will close up this gap, the difference between Q1 and Q1, of course, by decreasing its taxes. So now we just, implement the things that I explained about the decrease in taxes. Now, as a result of the decrease in taxes, of course, the aggregate demand will shift to the right. It will continue to shift until it, intersects the long-run supply at point 2 here. So now what happens here? Of course, Q1 move to Qn, And of course, now, of course, we experience an increase in the price level, and of course an increase in the level of output. So as a result of the decrease in the income tax, the expansionary fiscal policy caused the economy to produce Q1, okay? However, the price level has increased from P1 to P2. Okay? This is, of course, the use of the expansionary fiscal policy when the economy is in a recessionary gap. That is, when the level of output is less than the full employment output or the national GDP. So let us now see how the contractionary fiscal policy is used. So the same thing, using a contractionary fiscal policy. Of course, this one is used when an inflationary gap exists. Consider this is real GDP, this is price level, this is aggregate demand, short run aggregate supply, and this is QM. This is long run aggregate supply. As you can see, the economy is performing much better than the long run equivalent. Q1, as you can see, Q1 is greater than QN. Therefore, we have inflationary gap. When Q1 is greater than QN, which is the national GDP, then we have inflationary gap. So how the government, through the use of a contractionary fiscal policy, is going to close up this gap? So now, through the contractionary fiscal policy, of course, through the decrease in G or increase in taxes, of course, what will happen? Aggregate demand will decrease. That is a shift to the left. So, a decrease, when G decreases, that implies aggregate demand decreases, which implies it shifts to the left. This implies, as you can see, it shifts to the left. So it continues to shift until it reaches here. Aggregate demand 1, 2. So now what happens here? We move from 1 to 2. So now we moved from point 1 to point 2. As this is the level, this is price, okay? And this is here, P1, and this is P2. So what happens now? Of course, as a result of using the contractionary fiscal policy, of course, the level of output has decreased and the price level has decreased. As you can see, we were producing Q1 before the use of contractionary fiscal policy. Now, after the use of the contractionary fiscal policy, Q1, of course, moved to Qn. Okay, that is, the level of output decreased. Okay, this implies Q1 decreases to Qn, and the price level decreases from P1 to P2. So through the use of the contractionary fiscal policy, as you can see, we have closed up the gap, and then inflation has, reduced or has decreased. Okay, this is as a result of using the contractionary fiscal policy. Of course, we can also use taxes. We could increase taxes in order to use the contractionary. Here we use government spending, decrease in government spending. Now, in order to use the contractionary fiscal policy, of course, by using taxes, all we have to do, we just increase the level of taxes. So let us, give an example of this. Using the income tax to close up the output gap. In order to use the contractionary fiscal policy through taxes, okay, now the government tax rate increases, which implies disposable income YD will what? Will decrease, which implies consumption will decrease, which implies aggregate demand will decrease. Okay, so tax rate increases, income tax rate increases, that implies disposable income, which is equal to Y minus T, will decrease, and when disposable income decreases, that implies consumption will decrease, and because consumption is a factor of aggregate demand, then aggregate demand will decrease, which means that it shifts to the left. It shifts to the left. So as you can see, the same graph, real GDP, price level, aggregate demand, short run aggregate supply, and then we have, of course, here long run aggregate supply. This is Qn, and this is here Q1. So when the government uses the contractionary fiscal policy, it means, of course, aggregate demand will decrease, that is, it will shift to the left until, of course, aggregate demand, of course, will shift to the left in order to close up the gap. AD1 to here, okay? So the price level, of course, so as you can see from here, that we move from 1 to 2. We move from 1 to 2, okay? And the net result, of course, we have a decrease in the price level and a decrease in output. So we have, of course, a decrease in the price level and a decrease in output.